Joining me now is former U.S. Ambassador to Russia, Michael McFaul. Michael, I want to ask you about Gorbachev. I know you have a mixed view of him. Certainly, it evolved over time. When I did that interview, I also asked him about Vladimir Putin, whom he then supported. Not late in life, our understanding is from his biographer that he was very upset about the invasion of Ukraine and his own position on that having changed. But this is what he had to say when I asked him about Putin.
Do you think President Putin is committed, wants better relations with the United States?
Хочет улучшения отношений с США? Yes. Absolutely. Yes.
Some Americans are nervous about him because he's formerly KGB and he's not Mikhail Gorbachev. He's not someone we understand.
Of course he is not Gorbachev. He is Putin. No doubt about that. That I can assure you. It's true. But there are the people of America and the people of Russia. And certainly the American president and the Russian president will definitely have to reckon with that. And I do believe that he is a person with whom you can deal.
And he went on to say, Mike McFaul, that the American people and the Russian people know that they need to work together. These two countries had to work together. He had confidence in the Russian people and in the American people.
Yeah, extraordinary interview, Andrea. But 2001 was a very different time. Right. Some of us were worried about Putin. I'd written many articles by 2001 worrying about his autocratic ways. But in 2001, especially after September 11th, we did come together as countries and as people. We had a common enemy, terrorism. And back then, President Bush also thought that we could work with Putin. It was what happened after 2001 that pushed us apart. But back then, it was a much more optimistic time.
He was already cracking down on the media, because I did ask him about that. Gorbachev was a complex figure, but from my perspective, having covered Ronald Reagan for so long and all the summits, the evolution of the arms control agenda was so profound under these two leaders from what we anticipated. If you recall, the hardliners in both countries, in our Pentagon, fighting with George Shultz at the State Department. And it was George Shultz, aided and abetted by Nancy Reagan, who moved Reagan post-Reykjavik into a posture of really, wanting to open up.
Well, you're absolutely right. I'm glad you give a shout out to Secretary of State George Shultz. I think he did play that role that you just described. But Mikhail Gorbachev, I think, is one of the most important figures of the 20th century, in part for what he did, and those negotiations over arms control are proactive things that he did. But he's also important for what he didn't do, as your piece described. He didn't stop the East Germans from tearing down the wall with the West Germans in 1989. He thought about using force to keep the Soviet Union together, and he did use special forces in January 1991 in the Baltic republics, now independent states. People died. That is also part of Gorbachev's legacy. But at the end of the day, he didn't stop things from happening, and he most certainly didn't stop the Soviet Union from collapsing. And that, I think, we all have to be grateful for. He allowed Eastern Europe to become democratic, and he allowed the Soviet Empire to die, comparatively speaking, rather peacefully.
And one last little moment when I asked him about his own legacy, here's what he had to say.
And the legacy of Mikhail Gorbachev?
A big legacy. I think, well, it's the facts. My ideas, I believe, go well beyond the time in which I was president. I believe they are still important. Let us see what happens next.
So what has happened next is certainly profoundly different from the vision that he had, is it not?
It is. And, tragically, inside Russia, nobody celebrates him. He's not a revered figure in Russia yet. But I think history will be kind for him. And we'll have to probably measure that in decades. But I think he will go down in history as a historic figure that made the world better than when he became General Secretary in 1985.
Well, Mike, your perspective is so important, and I'm going to reread some of what you've written in the past about him, just as I try to absorb the importance of, one of the most important figures I've ever covered. So thank you so much,
Yeah,
Ambassador
thanks for
Mike
having
McCaul.